before rockets touched the stars, before space tourism was more than just a dream. There was a quiet little company tucked away in a warehouse in Washington. No loud headlines, no countdowns, just a quiet idea. What if millions of people could live and work in space? Tonight, we begin a gentle journey through the entire history of Blue Origin, from its humble beginnings to test flights in the Texas desert, to moments that changed how we dream about space. So find a comfortable place to rest. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let's slowly drift into the story of how one quiet idea reached for the stars. 2000, a quiet beginning in Washington. Before we begin, kindly let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy boring American history videos for sleep like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. In the year 2000, a quiet new venture took root in Kent, Washington, a suburb of Seattle. It was here that Jeff Bezos, then known primarily as the founder of Amazon, founded a private space company called Blue Origin. Unlike the noisy fanfare that often accompanies big ideas, Blue Origin's birth was calm and almost secretive. Bezos had a grand but simple vision for this little company. He dreamed of a future where millions of people are living and working in space for the benefit of Earth. This hopeful mission would guide Blue Origin from the very start, even if it would be years before the public learned of its goals. In these early days, Blue Origin's purpose was ambitious yet patient. The name Blue Origin itself refers to Earth, our blue planet, the origin of our journeys. Bezos wanted to help humanity take small, steady steps toward the stars. His ultimate goal was not just launching rockets for the sake of it, but to enable an enduring human presence beyond Earth. All of this began in a nondescript warehouse in Kent, with a handful of engineers quietly sketching rocket designs on whiteboards. It was a humble start for a company aiming to unlock the heavens, and at first hardly anyone even knew it existed. Before we jump into the next chapter, just a quick heads up. The visuals in this video add some extra context, but you don't need to watch them to enjoy the stories. So feel free to let this play in the background while you work, chill, or even drift off to sleep with the entire history of Blue Origin. Also, if you'd like to help us keep making these videos and get access to exclusive content, plus enjoy everything ad-free, consider supporting us on Patreon. You'll find the link in the description and the comments section below. Alright, let's get back to the stories. 2001 to 2002, stealth mode and early experiments. During 2001 and 2002, Blue Origin operated in stealth mode, working behind closed doors and saying little to outsiders. In fact, very little was known about the company's activities in its early years. It kept a very low profile, funded solely by Bezos's private money. There were no flashy press releases or public tests yet. The small team in Seattle spent these quiet years focused on research and tinkering. They studied rocket science diligently and began experimenting with ideas on a small scale. If you peeked inside their facility, you might see engineers testing tiny thrusters or writing code for guidance systems, all under a veil of secrecy. For the outside world, Blue Origin was almost invisible, but inside, a bold plan was taking shape. What kind of plan? Reusability, a new way to launch and land rockets so they could be flown over and over again. Bezos and his engineers were inspired by a simple but revolutionary concept. Rockets should take off and land upright, returning gently to the ground after a flight. In these early years, Blue Origin set its sights on developing a vertical takeoff, vertical landing VTVL system, meaning the rocket would launch straight up and then come back down to land on its tail, just as it launched. This was very different from how rockets had been used in the past. Most were used once and discarded in the ocean. Blue Origin believed that making rockets reusable, like airplanes that can fly many times, would dramatically lower the cost of going to space. So, in the quiet Kent workshop, they began designing a small rocket that could do just that. It was a challenging task that required patience. Step by step, the team experimented with engines, controls, and landing legs, all with the dream that one day their rocket would rise to space and come back down to be used again. 2003, a new leader steers the ship. By 2003, Blue Origin was still a tiny, secretive outfit, but it gained an important new member. Rob Meyerson, an aerospace engineer with years of experience, joined Blue Origin in 2003 to help lead the young company. Meyerson had previously worked on NASA projects and understood how to manage complex spacecraft development. Jeff Bezos brought him on as a program manager, and Meyerson soon became Blue Origin's first president. Under Rob Meyerson's guidance, the company began to grow from just a handful of people into a larger team. In the beginning, Blue Origin had maybe around 10 employees, small enough that everyone knew each other and wore many hats. Meyerson helped lay down early plans and instilled discipline in projects, turning Bezos's broad vision into concrete steps. He was often seen huddling with engineers over blueprints or overseeing test setups, ensuring that each small experiment brought them closer to a working rocket. This period was still low-key. Blue Origin wasn't making headlines, but internally, the company was maturing. With Meyerson at the helm alongside Bezos, the team felt a growing sense of purpose. They had the leadership and technical direction needed to turn their ambitious ideas into reality, one careful step at a time. 2004. Building a home in the West Texas desert. In 2004, Blue Origin took a big step beyond its Seattle area lab. Jeff Bezos knew that to test rockets, they would need a large, safe area away from cities, a place where engines could roar and rockets could soar without endangering the public. That year, Bezos purchased a huge 165,000-acre ranch in West Texas to become Blue Origin's private rocket testing ground. This remote property, often called Corn Ranch and later known as Launch Site 1, is about 30 miles north of the small town of Van Horn, Texas. The land is vast and quiet, stretching over desert plains and scrubby hills under an open sky. It was the perfect hidden sanctuary for Blue Origin's next phase. On this isolated Texas range, construction began to transform the ranch into a spaceport. Blue Origin started building all the basics a rocket site needs: an engine test stand, fuel and water tanks, and a simple launch pad and control center. At first, these structures were modest, perhaps just concrete pads and metal tanks, but they were crucial. In the middle of tumbleweeds and cactus, fences went up and a gate with the Blue Origin feather logo appeared, marking this secret place where rockets would soon fly. Locals in Van Horn were curious about what was happening on the sprawling ranch, but the company remained mostly silent and now had its own private testing grounds, where they could fire engines and eventually launch their prototype rockets far from prying eyes. The West Texas evenings were calm and warm, filled with the sounds of crickets, and occasionally the rumble of a rocket engine being tested in the distance. Blue Origin's dream was literally breaking ground here, laying a foundation for the skyward journeys to come. 2005. Revealing the vision. Enter New Shepard. By 2005, 5 years into its journey, Blue Origin finally began to peek out from the shadows and share a bit of its plan with the world. That year, Jeff Bezos made a rare public outreach in Van Horn. He met with the editor of the local newspaper in the back of a small Radio Shack store, and for the first time explained Blue Origin's goals to the community. Bezos described something truly exciting. His company was building a spacecraft that would launch straight up into the sky and then come back down to land vertically on Earth. In simple terms, it would take off and land like a rocket, not like an airplane. This vehicle, he said, would be capable of carrying a small group of people to the very edge of space and back. Around this time, Blue Origin publicly announced the name of its suborbital rocket, New Shepard. The rocket was named in honor of Alan Shepard, the first American astronaut to travel to space. The choice of name was fitting. Just as Alan Shepard's 15-minute flight in 1961 was a pioneering step for America, Blue Origin's New Shepard would be a pioneering first step for commercial suborbital space travel. New Shepard was designed as a fully reusable suborbital rocket system built for human flight from the beginning. It consisted of a booster rocket and a crew capsule, with the idea that both parts could be recovered and reused. The plan was for New Shepard to carry perhaps 3 passengers or up to 6 in later designs, on a journey just past the Kármán line, the boundary of space about 100 kilometers above Earth, and then come back down. In 2005, Blue Origin started to speak more openly about these plans, generating a sense of anticipation. They were still very cautious about details, but at least the world now knew the company's focus: space tourism and research flights on a reusable rocket. It was an exciting and inspiring concept, presented in a modest, matter-of-fact way. For the first time, ordinary people, not just astronauts, were part of the vision. Blue Origin was working so that one day, everyday Americans might take a short trip to space and safely return. This gentle unveiling of New Shepard marked the end of Blue Origin's total secrecy. Now the public understood what Bezos's team had been quietly building all those years. A feeling of gentle curiosity and wonder began to grow around Blue Origin's project. Could they really make such a rocket work? The answer would soon arrive as the company prepared for its very first flight test. 2006, the Goddard Soars, first test flight success. All of Blue Origin's patient work paid off in 2006, on a calm day in November of that year. At the remote West Texas site, the team prepared for a historic moment: the first ever flight of a Blue Origin rocket. The test vehicle was a small, squat rocket prototype, affectionately named Goddard, after Robert Goddard, the father of modern rocketry. It didn't look like the sleek rockets you see in movies. It was more like a stout cylinder with landing legs. But it was about to make history for the company. On November 13, 2006, just after dawn, Goddard's engines ignited and the vehicle launched straight upward from the desert floor. A thunderous roar echoed across the empty landscape as the little rocket rose into the sky, leaving a trail of dust and smoke. The Blue Origin team, watching from a safe distance, held their breaths. Goddard climbed to an altitude of roughly 285 to 300 feet, about the height of a 20-story building, and then, after hovering momentarily at its peak, it descended back down. Incredibly, it landed gently, tail first, on the same pad it launched from, using its thrusters to slow itself down. The entire flight lasted only about 30 seconds from launch to landing, but it was absolutely flawless. When the dust settled, there stood Goddard, upright on the pad as intended. Blue Origin had just demonstrated that their vertical takeoff and vertical landing technology worked on a real flight. For the team, this success was exhilarating, yet in true Blue Origin fashion, it was celebrated quietly. In fact, Blue Origin initially did not even announce the test right away. They kept a cautious silence until they were certain of the results. Only weeks later did the company share a few photos and a video clip on its website, showing the world the picture-perfect hop of the Goddard vehicle. Those images were remarkable. The stubby rocket rising on a pillar of flame and then touching back down softly on the Texas soil. For many space enthusiasts, it was proof that Bezos' secretive project was very real and making progress. For the Blue Origin team, it was a triumphant moment, years in the making. One can imagine that night, the engineers and technicians gathered under the clear Texas sky, perhaps around a campfire or in their simple bunkhouse, feeling relief and pride. Overhead, the Milky Way would have stretched across the darkness, a reminder of why they were doing all this. They had taken a small step toward space, and it worked. The successful Goddard test flight in 2006 was a gentle but profound milestone. It proved that a rocket could indeed be launched and landed in a controlled, reusable way, just as Blue Origin had envisioned. This little hop would pave the way for more ambitious tests. In the coming years, the new Shepard system would be refined and tested at higher altitudes, eventually carrying its first passengers. But on that day, in 2006, Blue Origin's team simply savored the moment. Their dream was slowly lifting off the ground, one careful step at a time. 2007 to 2011, steps into the sky. As the sun rose over the West Texas desert in the early months of 2007, Blue Origin stood quietly on the edge of possibility. The success of the Goddard prototype flight in 2006 had marked a turning point. Now, the team felt ready to take more steps upward, slowly, carefully, and always with precision. There were no crowds, no television cameras, just engineers and technicians working patiently, one flight test at a time. From 2007 to 2010, Blue Origin focused on what might seem like the smallest tasks in rocketry: testing, adjusting, and testing again. These were not high-flying missions into space, but low-altitude test flights designed to perfect the company's vertical takeoff and landing technology, the quiet backbone of its long-term vision. Each test was short and simple. The vehicles didn't aim for space. They would rise to a few hundred feet, hover in the air, then carefully descend, using their engines to touch down as softly as possible. These gentle hops helped engineers refine the systems needed to guide, stabilize, and land a rocket safely and autonomously. The work was deliberate. Every successful test meant that a few more variables had been understood, a few more risks addressed. Each flight ended with the team reviewing slow-motion video, checking sensors, and making tiny adjustments. If a valve opened too fast, they'd tune it. If the rocket wobbled slightly during descent, they'd recalculate. Each lesson brought them closer to building a system people could one day trust with their lives. Outside the company, few people knew what was happening. Blue Origin maintained its tradition of quiet progress. The public saw very little, but inside the fences of Launch Site 1, something remarkable was unfolding. A methodical journey toward space that didn't begin with grand leaps, but with small, repeating steps. These years were about learning, not rushing. Blue Origin wasn't racing anyone. It was training its rockets and itself to master the art of vertical flight. Slowly, the company began shaping the vehicle that would one day carry people into space. A new version of New Shepard, sleeker, taller, and designed for much more than just hopping. The world was changing too. Other space companies were gaining attention. NASA was opening the door to private partnerships, inviting companies like Blue Origin to take part in the future of spaceflight. And all the while, Blue Origin continued its quiet march, focusing not on spectacle, but on reliability. By 2011, Blue Origin was ready to push further. After years of low-altitude tests, the team began preparing for higher flights, real suborbital journeys that would leave the atmosphere behind. They now had a full new Shepard system in development. It included a tall booster rocket and a rounded crew capsule. The booster would carry the capsule into space, then fall away and return to Earth, landing on its own. The capsule would drift back down using parachutes, touching down gently in the desert. It was a design built for passengers, not just engineers and scientists, but in time, ordinary people, perhaps a teacher, or a student, or a retired worker who had dreamed of space since childhood. That dream, however, still required careful work, and in 2011, Blue Origin faced its first real setback. During a test flight of the new Shepard booster, something went wrong. The vehicle lost control during ascent and had to be destroyed mid-flight to ensure safety. It was a hard moment for the team. Years of effort gone in seconds. But it was also part of the process. In rocketry, not everything works the first time. Every space pioneer, from Goddard to Apollo, faced failures along the way. What mattered was how the team responded. Blue Origin didn't give up. The data from the failed test was carefully studied. Engineers examined every moment of the flight to understand what happened, and they learned from it. Quietly, without press conferences or public blame, the company adjusted its systems, reinforced its designs, and began planning the next test. There was no panic, just persistence. The kind of quiet resilience that had defined Blue Origin since the very beginning. Even in setback, the vision held strong, a reusable rocket system, safe and reliable, that could one day carry humans beyond the sky. By the end of 2011, Blue Origin had weathered its first major loss and emerged with greater experience. It was not yet ready for passengers, but it was ready to keep going, step by step. From 2007 to 2011, Blue Origin's journey was not filled with headlines. There were no grand launches or astronauts waving from capsules. Instead, it was a time of building trust in the machines, in the systems, and in the slow, steady process of learning how to fly. The skies above West Texas remained quiet most days, but once in a while, a rumble would rise across the desert. A rocket would lift off, hover in the blue, and settle back down as if practicing a dance it had nearly mastered. In these gentle rhythms, Blue Origin was preparing for the future, one careful breath at a time. 2012 to 2014, gaining trust, gaining partners. As the new decade quietly unfolded, Blue Origin entered a time of deeper testing and growing trust. Though its rockets had not yet reached orbit, the company had already proven something more important, that it was willing to learn, improve, and take each step with care. In the year 2012, Blue Origin returned to flight testing with a renewed sense of focus. The vehicle they were working on, New Shepard, was no longer just a dream. It was real, and in 2012, it passed one of the most important tests of all. That October, Blue Origin carried out a test that might seem dramatic in concept, but was essential for safety. A pad escape test. The idea was simple, yet powerful. If something went wrong during launch, the crew capsule needed a way to get away fast, just in case. And so, the team prepared for a moment they hoped would never be needed in real life. A launch escape system. A rocket motor built right into the capsule, ready to fire at a moment's notice, carrying passengers away from danger in a split second. On the test day, the capsule sat atop its test stand. There was no tall booster rocket beneath it, just the capsule and its escape motor. When the countdown reached 0, the escape engine fired with a blast of energy, sending the capsule shooting up and away from the stand. It climbed rapidly into the air, soared to a height of over 2,300 feet, and then, calmly, deployed its parachutes and floated back down to the desert floor. Everything worked perfectly. It was a brief flight, but a vital milestone. The test proved that if Blue Origin ever needed to save passengers during a launch emergency, it could. The escape system would carry them to safety, fast, smoothly, and with precision. Though the event received little public attention, it marked a turning point. Blue Origin's technology wasn't just experimental anymore. It was showing signs of being truly safe. That October escape test, along with other work, helped reinforce what the company had always promised: slow is smooth, and smooth is safe. Just one day after the escape test, Blue Origin completed another suborbital flight. This time, the capsule reached over 2,000 feet, further testing its systems and re-entry profile. Again, it returned gently beneath a trio of parachutes. These tests were helping refine every detail: altitude, stability, heat resistance, and descent control. The team was shaping a spacecraft meant to protect human life, and they took that responsibility seriously. While these tests quietly unfolded in the West Texas desert, Blue Origin's work was starting to draw attention from a familiar name: NASA. That same year, the company was invited to participate in NASA's Commercial Crew Program, a bold initiative to involve private companies in the future of American spaceflight. NASA was looking for new spacecraft to carry astronauts to and from space, and it saw promise in Blue Origin's careful approach. Through this partnership, Blue Origin received support and feedback as it continued developing new capsule designs, escape systems, and engine technologies. It was a small step into the broader world of public-private cooperation, and a sign that Blue Origin was being taken seriously, not just by space fans, but by the very agency that had once sent Apollo to the moon. By 2013, Blue Origin was growing. Quietly, and with little fanfare, the company's workforce expanded to around 300 people. The office in Kent, Washington, buzzed with new engineers, designers, and technicians. Some worked on flight systems, others focused on software or propulsion, and in the background, the company continued refining its BE-3 engine, the powerful, hydrogen-fueled motor that would drive New Shepard skyward. Though Blue Origin still kept many details private, a sense of steady progress began to emerge. Each new hire, each test, and each drawing on the wall added to the quiet rhythm of growth. And then came 2014, a year that would quietly shift the company's trajectory. In September of 2014, Blue Origin entered a major new partnership with United Launch Alliance, a company that had long launched satellites for the US government and private industry. At the heart of this partnership was an engine, one that Blue Origin had been developing in-house. It was called the BE-4. Unlike the smaller B-3 used for New Shepard, the BE-4 was big. Designed for orbital rockets, it would use liquefied natural gas and liquid oxygen to generate tremendous power. And ULA was interested because they needed a new engine to power their future launch vehicle, which would eventually become known as Vulcan. This partnership marked a moment of quiet confidence. Blue Origin, once seen as a mysterious startup, was now providing engines for America's most trusted launch provider. It was a sign of trust. A sign that Blue Origin's slow and careful path had earned respect in the rocket world. The BE-4 project was just getting started, but it would go on to play a key role in Blue Origin's ambitions beyond suborbital flights. It was a bridge between the company's small new Shepard rocket and its grander goals, rockets that could reach orbit, deliver satellites, and maybe even support space stations or lunar missions. And so, by the end of 2014, Blue Origin stood at a gentle crossroads. On one side, it continued testing and refining New Shepard, preparing for the day it would carry people above the clouds. On the other side, it was planting seeds for something much bigger. Engines, partnerships, and the quiet planning of a new rocket system, not yet announced to the public. The world still knew little about what Blue Origin was becoming. But inside its labs and test sites, the future was unfolding with care. Each step, from the pad escape test to the BE-4 announcement, had brought Blue Origin closer to its goal. And as always, it had done so with quiet patience. It had not flown a passenger yet, but it was getting ready. The capsule had flown. The engines had fired. The systems were coming together. The sky was calling, and Blue Origin was almost ready to answer. 2015 to 2016. A rocket returns, and a new name is whispered. By the time 2015 arrived, Blue Origin had been working quietly for 15 years. 15 years of designing, testing, refining, and learning. Now, the team was ready to show the world what they had been building and why they had waited so patiently. That year, in a wide-open stretch of West Texas desert, Blue Origin made history. On a clear November morning in 2015, the company launched New Shepard. Not just a test, but a real flight to space. The slender rocket stood tall on the pad, its white body gleaming in the sunlight, topped by a rounded crew capsule. With a countdown and a flash of flame, New Shepard lifted off, soaring straight into the sky. It climbed higher and higher, passing through thin air, then into the stillness above the clouds. The booster rocket carried the capsule all the way to the edge of space, above the Kármán line, more than 62 miles high. For just a moment, the capsule floated at the top of its flight, in the weightless silence of space. It was uncrewed, but built to carry people. If passengers had been aboard, they would have seen the darkness of space above and the gentle curve of Earth below. Then the two parts, the capsule and the booster, separated. The capsule began drifting downward, deploying its parachutes and preparing for a soft landing. But all eyes were on the booster. This was the moment that set Blue Origin apart. Instead of falling to the ground and being lost forever, the New Shepard booster turned itself around in midair. It slowed its fall. Then, using its engines, it gently lowered itself back to Earth. And then, something truly remarkable happened. The booster landed upright, soft and steady, right back on the launch pad. For the first time in history, a rocket that had flown to space had returned to land vertically, ready to be used again. It was a quiet revolution. No fireworks, no crowds. Just a tall rocket standing calmly in the desert, as if it had never left. But it had. It had kissed the edge of space and come home. For Blue Origin, this was a dream made real. Reusability wasn't just a theory anymore. It had been proven. The future of spaceflight had changed, and it had changed with grace. Jeff Bezos called the flight the rarest of beasts, a rocket that went to space and came back in one piece. That day, in November 2015, Blue Origin took a giant step forward. But they didn't rush to celebrate. They simply prepared for the next flight. And just a few months later, in early 2016, they did it again. The same rocket launched again and again. It flew to space and landed upright. Not once, but multiple times throughout the year, Blue Origin launched, flew, and landed the same new Shepard booster. Each time, it worked. In a field where rockets had long been disposable, Blue Origin was proving that a new era was possible. One where spaceflight could become more affordable, more frequent, and one day, more accessible to everyone. The flights were uncrewed for now, carrying scientific experiments instead of people, but the capsule was built for humans. It had windows, the largest ever flown in space at that time, and it was being prepared, little by little, for the moment when passengers could climb aboard. While the world marveled at the landings, Blue Origin was already thinking ahead, even higher, even farther. Because in September of 2016, Blue Origin made an announcement that felt like a whisper of the future. They unveiled a new project, a much larger rocket, still under development, but destined for orbital flight. Its name was New Glenn, named in honor of John Glenn, the first American to orbit Earth. This new rocket was enormous, over 300 feet tall, with 2 or even 3 powerful stages. It would be capable of delivering satellites, cargo, and perhaps even people into orbit. And like New Shepard, New Glenn was designed to be reusable. Its first stage would return to Earth after flight, landing on a floating platform at sea. The reveal came with a simple illustration and a quiet promise. Blue Origin was stepping into the next phase. The New Glenn project wasn't flashy. There were no test flights yet, just blueprints, animations, and a plan. But it was real, and it showed that Blue Origin's vision extended far beyond short hops to space. From a tiny team in a Kent warehouse to reusable rockets and orbital dreams, the journey had come far. By the end of 2016, Blue Origin stood at the edge of something new. It had proven that its rockets could fly and return. It had built trust with NASA. It had partnered with major companies. And now it was preparing to leave Earth's atmosphere for good. Still, the company moved with care. No rush, no shortcuts. It had always believed that the right path was a gradual one, measured, precise, and deliberate. In a world chasing fast results, Blue Origin was content to move slowly, because they believed that slow was smooth, and smooth was safe. The rocket had flown, the capsule had landed, the engines were humming, and a new name, New Glenn, was quietly beginning its journey. The sky was no longer the limit. 2017 to 2019, from the desert sky to lunar dreams. By the time 2017 arrived, Blue Origin had already surprised the world by flying rockets to space and bringing them back home. But the journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. This year brought something new, a quiet signal that Blue Origin was ready to serve others, not just itself. In 2017, the company announced that it had secured its first commercial customer for its upcoming orbital rocket, New Glenn. That customer was Eutelside, a European satellite operator. It was a simple announcement, no fanfare, no video, just a calm confirmation that someone had placed their trust in Blue Origin's untested, still in development heavy-lift rocket. The trust meant something. It meant that the company was no longer just a private experiment or a personal dream. It was now part of the broader space industry, providing services, delivering cargo, and preparing to become a regular presence in orbit. At the same time, work continued back in the West Texas desert. There, the team was still flying New Shepard, refining every detail. Each test was more confident, more polished. The rocket soared above the clouds, then returned again and again, not once, not twice, but multiple times using the same vehicle. It was the kind of routine that had once seemed impossible in rocketry. And though the capsule remained empty, it was clear that Blue Origin was preparing it for people. Inside, the cabin was designed for comfort and safety, with large windows, gentle lighting, and padded seats. It wasn't just a testbed anymore, it was becoming a real passenger spacecraft. As 2018 approached, Blue Origin took another careful step. On April 29, 2018, the company launched a newer version of its suborbital rocket, sometimes referred to as New Shepard 2.0. It was an upgraded model, designed for future human flights, and it performed beautifully. On that day, the rocket rose to an apogee of 351,000 feet, just over 107 kilometers above Earth. That's higher than many jet planes ever fly, higher than most clouds, and well into space. The capsule, which carried a mannequin test passenger affectionately nicknamed Mannequin Skywalker, was packed with sensors. It gathered data on pressure, temperature, movement, every factor that could affect a real human on board. The goal was to make spaceflight as smooth and safe as possible for future passengers. Back on the ground, Blue Origin's team quietly celebrated. The booster had landed. The capsule had landed. Everything had worked just as it should. But even as the company perfected its suborbital flights, it had another destination in mind, one that lay far beyond the Texas plains, far beyond Earth's sky. It was time to look once again toward the moon. In 2019, Jeff Bezos stood before a small audience and unveiled a new project. It wasn't just a rocket or a capsule. It was something more ambitious. He called it Blue Moon. It was a sleek, tall lunar lander designed to touch down softly on the moon's surface, carrying cargo, equipment, and possibly even astronauts. With gentle curves and strong legs, the Blue Moon lander was meant to be part of the future, a piece of infrastructure for lunar exploration. It could deliver scientific instruments, rovers, and supplies, and it was built to work with NASA's vision of returning humans to the moon under the Artemis program. Bezos didn't promise fast results. He didn't give a launch date that year. Instead, he spoke about the future, a future where millions of people could live and work in space. Beginning with the moon, the Blue Moon lander, he explained, would help make that possible. For some, it seemed bold. For others, it felt distant. But for Blue Origin, it was right on time. The next step in a journey that had always been about patience, reliability, and quiet progress. Back at the company's Kent headquarters, teams continued their work. Engineers ran simulations. Designers refined lunar guidance systems. Propulsion experts worked on new engines. Everything was building, slowly, carefully, towards something bigger. That same year, Blue Origin also expanded its reach on Earth. The company continued building and testing its powerful BE-4 engine, which would soon be used not only for its own rockets, but also for United Launch Alliance's Vulcan rocket. In factories and testing bays, engines roared, data was collected, and steady improvements were made. And all the while, the New Shepard system kept flying. Each launch brought Blue Origin closer to the day it would fly people. Each flight strengthened the team's confidence. It was no longer just about proving that a rocket could return. It was about preparing for passengers to look out the window, feel the weightlessness, and come back down safe and sound. As 2019 came to a close, Blue Origin was many things. It was a suborbital pioneer, a rocket engine supplier, a lunar lander designer, and quietly, It was growing into one of the most trusted and consistent forces in commercial space. There were no shortcuts, no rushes to headlines, just quiet determination and a belief that space is not a destination for the few, but a future for the many. Blue Origin was now flying higher, dreaming farther, and preparing, step by careful step, for a time when going to space might be as routine as boarding an airplane. The sky had once been the goal. Now it was simply the beginning. 2020 to 2021. People aboard, and a lunar invitation. As the world turned into a new decade, Blue Origin's story reached a gentle but powerful turning point. By 2020, the company had tested its rockets, perfected its landings, and proven that it could fly to space and return safely. For years, the capsule had been empty, carrying sensors, test dummies, and research payloads. But now, for the first time, the quiet spacecraft was being prepared for real passengers. But that wasn't the only major step Blue Origin took that year. In April 2020, something significant happened. Something that tied the company's quiet efforts to the boldest dream in space exploration: returning humans to the moon. NASA announced that it had selected a Blue Origin-led team to help design a human landing system for the Artemis program. This was the same program that aimed to send the first woman and the next man to the lunar surface. The Blue Origin team wasn't working alone. It was joined by other trusted partners: Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper. Together, they formed what was called a national team. Each member would contribute a different piece of the puzzle: propulsion, guidance, crew systems, and more. Blue Origin's part: the lander, a tall, elegant machine called Blue Moon, a continuation of the vision first unveiled in 2019. It would softly descend to the lunar surface, powered by a new engine called the BE-7, designed specifically for space landings. The selection wasn't a final contract, not yet, but it showed that NASA trusted Blue Origin to help shape the future of human exploration beyond Earth. Inside the company, the work picked up speed, with engineers designing, simulating, and testing lunar systems, all while other teams continued preparing new Shepard for something that had never happened before: human spaceflight. And finally, the time came. After 21 years since its founding, after years of testing in secret and refining in the desert, Blue Origin was ready to fly people. The date was July 20th, 2021. It had been carefully chosen. On that same day, 52 years earlier, Apollo 11 had landed on the moon. Now, on this anniversary, another group of humans would rise into the sky. The new Shepard rocket stood tall in the West Texas morning light. Its sleek white booster had already flown to space before. It had been tested and proven. But now, it would carry its first human crew. Inside the crew capsule were 4 passengers: Jeff Bezos, the founder of Blue Origin; Mark Bezos, his brother; Wally Funk, an 82-year-old aviation pioneer who had trained as part of the Mercury 13, a group of women who had once hoped to become astronauts; and Oliver Deeman, an 18-year-old student from the Netherlands. They were not astronauts in the traditional sense. They were not military pilots or trained scientists, but they were travelers, and they were about to cross the boundary of Earth's atmosphere. As the countdown reached 0, New Shepard lifted off, just as it had many times before. It climbed smoothly, accelerating into the deep blue sky, then into the blackness of space. Inside the capsule, the passengers floated, weightless. The Earth curved below, the stars stretched above. For several minutes, they experienced something only a few hundred humans in history had ever known: true spaceflight. Then, the capsule arced downward, Parachutes deployed, and gently, just as it had been designed, it returned to Earth, landing softly in the Texas desert. Applause rang out. Smiles filled the capsule. And history was made. On that day, Blue Origin became a spaceflight company in the truest sense. Not just flying hardware, but flying people. It had taken 21 years, but the journey had been worth it. Wally Funk, at 82 years old, became the oldest person to travel to space. Oliver Demon, at 18, became the youngest. And Jeff Bezos, whose quiet idea in 2000 had sparked the whole journey, had now seen his vision take flight, literally. But Blue Origin didn't stop there. Just months later, it flew another crew, then another. New Shepard, once a mysterious prototype hidden in the desert, had now carried multiple human missions, each time landing safely, each time proving that space travel could be repeatable, reliable, and real. And throughout it all, the company kept looking forward. The moon was still calling. Work on Blue Moon continued. Engineers pushed ahead on the BE-7 engine. Partnerships evolved. And though NASA had yet to make its final lunar decision, Blue Origin's presence in the Artemis program marked a major step from suborbital dreams to deep space goals. By the end of 2021, Blue Origin was no longer just a company with a vision. It was a company with a record of success, a team of professionals, a growing family of spacecraft, and a place in the story of human spaceflight. The booster had flown, the capsule had returned, the passengers had smiled, and somewhere in the future, not too far away, the moon awaited. 2022 to 2023, learning through setbacks, rising toward the moon. As 2022 arrived, Blue Origin had established itself as a genuine space company. New Shepard had carried passengers safely beyond Earth's atmosphere multiple times, gently returning them home to West Texas each time. But no journey, especially one toward space, comes without challenges. In the quiet months of 2022, Blue Origin faced one of those challenges. It was a routine day. The New Shepard rocket stood ready once again. This time, there were no passengers aboard, just experiments, scientific instruments, and research payloads. The team carefully checked every detail, preparing for another smooth journey into space. But during this uncrewed flight, something unexpected happened. Shortly after liftoff, the booster experienced an issue. Safety systems immediately responded, doing exactly what they were designed to do. The capsule fired its escape motor, quickly pulling itself away from the booster to safety. The capsule then drifted gently back down, its parachutes opening gracefully, landing softly and safely in the desert below. The booster, however, was lost. It was a quiet, thoughtful moment for Blue Origin. After years of successful flights, a rocket had been lost. But even in the setback, there was comfort. The safety systems had worked perfectly. If there had been people aboard, they would have been unharmed. For Blue Origin, this event was not a failure, it was a chance to learn. The company paused New Shepard flights temporarily, carefully examining every piece of data. Engineers and technicians quietly worked, studying what had happened and why. They took their time, knowing that patience was always key to safety. While New Shepard paused, other parts of Blue Origin continued moving forward. In May of 2023, a remarkable new opportunity arose. NASA had a mission called Artemis V, set for 2029, aiming to return astronauts to the lunar surface. For this historic mission, NASA chose Blue Origin's Blue Moon lander. It was a significant moment, an endorsement that would quietly shape the company's future. This wasn't just Blue Origin alone. It was a collaboration. Alongside Blue Origin stood powerful partners, companies like Lockheed Martin, Draper, Boeing, Astrobotic, and Honeybee Robotics. Together, they would create a lunar lander capable of delivering astronauts safely to the moon's surface. Work quickly began. Engineers drafted new plans, designed landing gear, tested engines, and carefully simulated every possible scenario. The Blue Moon lander grew from sketches and models into something tangible, a machine built for the harsh environment of space, meant to gently carry humans to the lunar surface for the first time in over half a century. Meanwhile, back in Texas, New Shepard was quietly repaired, refined, and prepared for flight once again. The setback had taught valuable lessons, and Blue Origin used every bit of knowledge to improve the system further. Then, quietly and confidently, in December 2023, New Shepard returned to the sky. The mission, called NS-27, was successful and smooth. The booster lifted off perfectly, carrying its payload of experiments, including small sculptures inspired by the classic story 2001, A Space Odyssey. After reaching space, both the capsule and booster returned safely and gently to Earth. It was more than just a successful return to flight. It was proof of resilience. Blue Origin had faced difficulty, learned from it, and come back stronger. And now, with the successful return of New Shepard, the team was again looking forward. By the end of 2023, Blue Origin was stronger than ever. New Shepard continued to fly smoothly, regularly, and safely. Plans for New Glenn, the larger orbital rocket, advanced steadily, with new factories being built and engines being tested. And the Blue Moon lunar lander project moved forward methodically, preparing to support NASA's return to the moon. The quiet setbacks had not weakened the company. Instead, they had deepened its resolve. Blue Origin knew that reaching space, and eventually the moon, required patience. It required humility, and most of all, it required a willingness to learn, grow, and continue moving forward gently but confidently. With each flight and each test, Blue Origin moved closer to becoming a leader in space exploration, not by shouting loudly, but by working carefully and steadily, never losing sight of the vision that had started everything. Millions of people, one day living and working in space. The moon was now in sight. The rockets were ready. And Blue Origin, calm and confident, was prepared for whatever came next. 2024 to early 2025. Milestones in space. As the calendar gently turned to 2024, Blue Origin continued its quiet but determined journey upward. Each flight was calm, each mission carefully prepared, and each step thoughtfully taken. In May of 2024, something very special happened aboard the New Shepard rocket. On May 19th, Blue Origin quietly celebrated a beautiful moment in history, a flight that gently reminded the world about dreams, resilience, and patience. On that day, Ed Dwight, a remarkable man who, decades earlier, had trained as America's first black astronaut candidate, finally journeyed to space. Ed Dwight was now 90 years old, and as he sat in the quiet capsule waiting for liftoff, a lifetime of dreams were about to become reality. The rocket rose calmly above the Texas desert, climbing smoothly past clouds through the blue sky and into the quiet stillness of space. Ed Dwight floated gently, finally looking down at the Earth from above, the culmination of decades of waiting, dreaming, and hoping. When the capsule landed softly in the desert dust, Ed Dwight had become the oldest person ever to travel into space. It was a beautiful reminder that dreams have no expiration date, and that space was now open to everyone, young or old, anyone with a dream and a willingness to reach for the stars. But Ed Dwight's gentle journey was not Blue Origin's only milestone in 2024. Throughout the year, the team was busy preparing something much larger, quietly working behind the scenes at factories in Florida and testing facilities around the country. They were finally ready for the next step in their gentle journey: New Glenn, Blue Origin's huge orbital rocket. Named after John Glenn, America's first astronaut to orbit the Earth, New Glenn was designed to carry satellites, experiments, and perhaps, one day, even humans into orbit. The rocket was enormous, over 300 feet tall. Its powerful engines, the BE-4 engines, roared quietly during tests. Engineers and technicians checked every system again and again, leaving nothing to chance. After years of careful, methodical preparations, the rocket was finally ready to fly. The date was January 16th, 2025. As dawn broke softly over the Atlantic Ocean, the massive rocket stood tall at Blue Origin's launch pad at Cape Canaveral, Florida. It was uncrewed, but carried a valuable payload, a satellite designed to serve people on Earth. When the countdown reached 0, New Glenn lifted off gently, its powerful engines rumbling steadily as it rose gracefully into the sky. The rocket climbed higher, gaining speed and altitude, moving swiftly toward orbit. Minutes later, the payload safely separated, settling gently into its designated path around the Earth. The first stage booster, the largest ever designed for reuse, began its descent back to Earth. But on this first attempt, the landing wasn't perfect. The booster wasn't recovered. It gently slipped beneath the waves into the ocean below. Yet, Blue Origin had known that this might happen. First flights rarely go exactly as planned. The primary mission was still a complete success. New Glenn had reached orbit and delivered its payload safely. It was a quiet but remarkable moment. After decades of dreaming, years of designing, testing, and building, Blue Origin had officially entered the orbital era. It was now not only launching rockets to space, but placing satellites around the Earth. But Blue Origin's gentle story didn't end there. A few months later, in April of 2025, another inspiring flight lifted off from the West Texas desert. This was the NS-31 mission aboard the new Shepard rocket, a historic journey carrying the first all-female crew of the 21st century. 6 remarkable women boarded the capsule: Loden Sanchez, journalist and aviator; Katy Perry, the beloved musician; Gayle King, the respected television anchor and journalist; Aisha Bowe, an accomplished aerospace engineer; Amanda Nguyen, a human rights activist dedicated to equality; Kerry-Ann Flynn, a pioneering entrepreneur. The rocket lifted off gently, the capsule rising higher and higher, past the Kármán line, into the peaceful silence of space. Together, these 6 women floated gently, weightless, above the Earth, smiling, looking through the large windows at our blue planet below. Their journey was brief but meaningful, quietly marking a significant moment, showing that space travel had truly opened to everyone. The capsule softly descended, parachutes opening gracefully, and touched down safely back on Earth. It was another gentle, historic milestone, proof that space belonged not just to a few, but to everyone. By early 2025, Blue Origin was firmly established in the world of spaceflight. It had carried astronauts of every age, background, and dream to space. It had begun orbital missions with New Glenn, and it was quietly preparing for humanity's return to the Moon through NASA's Artemis missions. But even as its accomplishments grew, Blue Origin never lost its calm, patient spirit. It remained quiet, steady, and thoughtful, remembering that each small step was as important as the great leaps. The journey wasn't loud or rushed. It was peaceful and deliberate, one gentle step after another, always reaching upward. As night settled gently over launch pads and testing grounds, Blue Origin's team prepared to rest, knowing they were part of a journey much larger than themselves. The future waited patiently, and Blue Origin, quiet and determined, continued forward. Please let us know what you learned from the entire history of Blue Origin, and share with us the country you're watching it from in the comments section below. And it would mean the world to us if you could like, subscribe, and share this video to your loved ones. Thank you everyone for watching. Sleep tight.